What is your role as an architect in your company? Do you have does anyone have a specific definition what an architect is supposed to do? Does anyone have one but doesn't want to say anything? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay. Give me one thing that you think an architect is supposed to do. The one most important thing. If you wouldn't do it, you should get fired.
Yeah, janitor.
Be a janitor.
Co-janitor.
A co-janitor. Clean up after everyone.
No, not clean up, but
Tidy up after everyone?
ensure that people keep it clean in some other way. But yeah, not the janitor, then. Maybe a caretaker, I don't know.
Yeah, because the janitor is if the janitor tells me to get things clean, I usually don't listen.
That's right. You're right.
Did someone here raise their hand? Yeah.
Look at the big picture.
Look at the big picture. Okay. That's very important. Yes.
Draw on whiteboards.
Draw on whiteboards. Why should you draw on whiteboards?
So other people can see it.
So other people can see it. Communication. Okay. So communicate with whiteboards. I guess that's a good answer. Anything else?
Coaching developers.
Coaching developers. Well, how did you know that? Amazing. Read slides. It's a very important skill. Well, coaching developers is one of those skills that you don't necessarily think about when you think about the role of an architect. And I'm going to explain why I think it's a very important thing to do. This is a book that I was planning to plug, but just so you know, there's a book that I'm writing about beautiful builds or build patterns. So it's still being written, but you can actually get it for as it's being written. So if you're interested, just Google for beautiful builds and you'll find it. So the reason I think that coaching is a very important thing is because a lot of us, when we become architects, either defined or undefined architects, we start asking interesting questions. Why are the things that I believe in are so difficult to convince everyone else to do? Has anyone ever had to fight with other people in order to do things the right way? But has anyone ever succeeded in fighting other people to do things the right way? Like everyone eventually did it? If you have like a success story that you don't have to share it. Just say that you have a success story. Okay, that's already. No one raised their hands. Now, I realize it might be because I'm in Norway. I'm going to assume that 3 people raised their hands. So you see only 3 people raise their hands. That's not a lot. Why do you think that is? Why do we get the things that are right in our heads? Why can we not get them to be the way we want things to be for everyone else? Because for some people, the definition of an architect is to make things right. Is to make sure that everything goes well, in the right way, to do things in the best way possible, to make sure that the things that you believe in are actually used, or to give guidance to others on how to build something. But a lot of architects fail in this regard. They fail not because they don't know how to do things right, they fail because they cannot get their message across, because they cannot get other people to do things right. That's the human side of being an architect. And in a way, an architect is a type of leader. Because a leader is anyone that can be considered with a specific specialty in a specific area. They are the leader in that area. And architects are usually the leaders in the area of architecture or design or system design. So a lot of architects have these wishes, and they feel like they will never come true. I wish my team did more unit testing, because that's important. I wish we had stand-up meetings that everyone would actually show up. I would have more time to do things right. How many people here, by raising hands, would love to do things the right way, but you don't have enough time to start doing it the right way? You just have to keep chasing fires. Okay, now that's more like it. A lot of projects are in this problem, where you know what you have to do, you know how to do it, everyone else would just love to stop everything and do it. But there is no way anyone will ever let you just do it. And one of the things I'll cover in my talk is how to achieve those things, and basically give a framework of what should happen and how to approach specific situations. So does this talk apply to you? It applies to leaders. You don't have to be an appointed leader. You don't have to be an appointed architect, but you are a leader. And again, as I said, a leader is someone with specific specialty, or as I call it, a bottleneck. Everyone who can be a bottleneck can be a leader. And a bottleneck is someone that everyone has to go to get answers. Okay? If you are that person where everyone just has to wait for you until you get out of the meeting so that you can answer some very important questions, then you are a bottleneck because people are stuck waiting for you. And you could say that being an architect is by definition being a bottleneck because you are the single person who is supposed to know or who is supposed to give answers on how to do everything. But being a bottleneck is also a very tough job because you never have time to learn new things because you keep solving everyone else's problems. You never have enough time because you keep solving the same problem over and over again because people don't seem to learn. They just seem to come back to you when they try to solve the problem. So they come back to you and say, I need a framework for this, or we don't know how to do this. Can you build some infrastructure that will help us to achieve this? And so you spend your nights and your weekends making that infrastructure, and then you say, here it is, your infrastructure. Use these APIs. And then 2 months later on a different project, you do the exact same thing. Then you start creating common infrastructure and giving it and saying everyone should use this common infrastructure and teaching people on how to use this common infrastructure. And every time you do this, you create another layer of ice between you and everyone else. You create another layer of ice that people have to break in order to actually not use your time. You create a layer of indirection between you and other people. Because you say, I am the only person who knows this stuff. And this is the definition of a bottleneck. So your role as a leader, because not only architects are bottlenecks. If you're the only database person in the team, you are a bottleneck as well. You're the database leader. If you're the only person in the team who knows UI or UX, you are the UX leader or UX bottleneck. So what is the role of a leader? That is the question that I want to ask. And to me, the role of a leader, a lot of us have no role. We just live. We just exist. Yeah, my role is to be here and to help everyone. But what am I supposed to do? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the overall value? So my feeling is that your role as a leader is to make yourself unneeded. To make yourself unneeded as a bottleneck. To not be the only person, but to actually create people around you with your knowledge. So instead of just someone who creates guidance, I think that your role is to be to infect others with your knowledge. Now, infect might be sounding negative, but the idea is that everyone who comes in contact with you leaves with some new knowledge. Just like there is a clean code mantra, leave every place you go to, leave the place better than you found it. The same thing applies to people. If you're working with a team for 3 months and you end up after 3 months with a team that doesn't know any new skills regarding architecture or design, then I feel that you have not done your job fully. In fact, I feel that you've missed the point of why you're there, why you get paid. And then I think you get paid to create other people who can answer the questions that you answer. So instead of you giving everyone answers on how to design something, you teach them how to answer it on their own. You create the people around you that know the answers just like you do. So instead of creating a framework for everyone who needs one, you teach them how to create their own framework. You teach them what goes on in your head when someone asks you for this answer. And you teach them to follow things on their own. And you are, in fact, their coach. Now, it's not always possible, but it's possible 90% of the time. Now, the only thing that's not possible is creating time, and we'll talk about time. So again, the idea is that as a leader, as an architect, your role is to grow the team that you have into the team that you want to have. If your team is a bunch of people who have never done design in their life, they've never even heard of n-layered architecture or anything like that, the only database they've ever worked with is Access. They've never heard of NoSQL. And here you are, like miles away in a distant planet, knowing all these things, and they don't even know that they don't know these things. If you've ever come across people who don't even know that they don't know, then this is your role, is to teach them all the things to teach them what they don't know. And then to give them the tools to learn it. Now, this is actually a very inspiring role. If you take this seriously, you become a different type of leader, not just someone who gives guidance about architecture, but someone who gives guidance about thinking, about ways of thinking. So by growing others to not need you, you're not going to get fired for it. You're actually going to go one level up in the organization, because you will be that person that you can put in the team, and the team becomes better. The team can start using its own architecture. And if you've ever heard of the idea of agile teams, and I'm sure everyone heard of it, one of the biggest mantras in agile teams is that a team is supposed to be self-organizing. But what is self-organization? Self-organization is that the team doesn't need anyone else outside the team to solve its problems. If they have a UI problem, they solve it inside the team. If they have an architecture problem, they solve it inside the team. Usually architects are shared between multiple teams. So if the team has to call you to solve their problem, they're not really self-organizing. You are their bottleneck and they're stuck. They cannot release without you. So by teaching everyone, by growing the people around you to become better, to be architects, then you actually create a self-organizing team. You help create your version of a self-organizing team, a team that can create its own architecture. They're almost like your kids. Like you teach them, you invest a lot of time, and then sometime they can actually start doing things. And it's not perfect, but they're learning. Like teaching your kid to tie their shoes. That takes a lot of time. But at the end, you're very, very, very proud, and they will never forget you for teaching that. And it is said that people don't leave their companies. They leave their managers, they leave their leaders. And if you think back about the jobs that you've had before, about the best people that you've gotten to work with, usually it will turn out that these people are the people that inspired you, or the people that pushed you to do something that you would never have done yourself, that gave you new skills, that gave you the chance to take a risk. So here you are saying, yeah, sure, Roy is just very, very inspirational, but that will never work in my team, because my team is different. In my team, this would never work. I can't grow my team, because the people in my team, there's this one guy who will never get it. Trust me, he'll never get it. I mean, I hear that in almost every team. And there's this one girl, I'll never be able to teach her. Whatever. Everyone thinks that. But the true challenge of leadership is to create the team that you want from the team that you have. That is the struggle that you have to go through. I think that's your role. Not just knowing architecture, but knowing how to spread the knowledge. If you want a great team, you can grow the team that you can grow a great team, but you can never hire a great team. People are not that diverse. So this is a paraphrase from a book called Leading Yourself and Others. Leadership done right is a tough job. That's why you get paid more. But a lot of leaders like to take the high salary but not do all the hard parts. So what are the hard parts of leadership? What are the hard parts of growing people? It's talking to people. It's sitting with people with one-on-ones. It's challenging people instead of solving their own problems. It's challenging them to solve their problems. And that's a very tough thing. Because when you think about it, if someone comes to you and says, look, I have this problem, I need your help. Can you solve this for me? And you tell them, I want you to solve it yourself. I'll help you, but you solve it, not me. The first thing that they might think is, or the first thing that you might think about yourself is, I'm not doing my job. That person just came to me for advice, and here I am just kicking them back and saying, nope, you try to solve it. But that's exactly one of the things that you will need to do. Because otherwise that person will never learn how to solve that design problem or that design issue. You can still teach them how to do it. Just don't do it for them. Coach them, pair with them. Let them find out the solution on their own. Guide them to make sure they get to the right place, but let them do it. Because if you do it for them, they will always come back to you and ask you for that solution. So how do you grow people? We have to understand how growth works. And to understand that, this is from a different book called Becoming a Technical Leader. By the way, this guy, Jerry Weinberg, he's written like 60 or 70 books. He's pretty old, but he's one of the smartest people I've gotten to meet. And he writes books about a million different subjects. And I would highly recommend just taking a look. From subsystems to overall full systems, you can learn a lot from his books. So in this graph, what you see is Gerald was plotting his progress in a specific game. This game was called the game of flipper, pinball, where you have to not let the ball drop. And these are basically his scores over a couple of years. And he wanted to measure his learning, and he said, okay, you can see that over time there is just a standard growth pattern. So my learning becomes better. I become a better player if I just continue to do something over time. But as he zoomed in, this pattern became very, very different. It didn't actually look like that. As he zoomed in, he saw that there were periods of very, very slow learning, where he became very slowly just a little bit better. And then there were periods of very quick learning, where he became instantly much better than he was. He was able to score much more points. And he tried to understand what happened in those periods. And he realized that what happened is that every time something like that, every time that he learned something new about how to play the game, he became better at the game. He thought about the game differently. For example, at the first uphill, he learned that when you have more than a single ball at the same time in the game, you get double points. So when he learned that trick, he started using it much more, and he started aiming for it, and his goal for the game became different. He was thinking about the game differently, and he became much better. So he learned different ways about thinking about the game. And so that was interesting, but then there was something else. There was even a bigger realization when he zoomed in even more about the scores, is that before he became much better, he actually became worse. Because imagine that, when he had to learn about playing with 2 or maybe 3 or 4 balls in the same game, he had to learn how to play again. He couldn't just play the way he did before. So at the beginning, it was actually worse. He got less points. Maybe he lost a lot of games at the beginning. So there was a period, maybe a few days, where he had to practice on playing the new way. And in a way, he had to unlearn what he knew before about how to play with a single ball. So there was a period where things were actually very difficult. And as he mastered playing with multiple game balls at the same time, he actually became much better. But there was a period of a drop. And in that period, he felt frustrated and annoyed, and it became very, very difficult to continue. But as he saw the pattern, he realized there's a pattern there. Whenever he learns something new, he actually is worse before he becomes better. And as I was reading this book, it became apparent that this, of course, applies to a lot of the things that we learn as programmers or as architects. When I started programming in Visual Basic 5 and 6. And then I moved to C#. Now, I was pretty good at VB5 and 6. I could do things in VB5 and 6 that a lot of people in VB5 and 6 had no idea that were possible. I was using VB6 as an object-oriented language almost, as much as possible. I did things in VB6 that I see today are patterns in C# and C++. And there I was, and then I started learning C# because I realized my time in VB6 is limited. And immediately I felt stupid. I couldn't even write the basic hello world with C# because I had to learn a new IDE. I had to learn a new set of tools. I had to learn about how assemblies work, about signing, about IL, about all that crap. I had to learn. It was wonderful learning it. But for the first month or two, I felt like the stupidest guy in the world. Because here in VB6, I was the master, and now I am the apprentice. I had no idea what I was doing. And slowly, after a few months, I became better. Not just marginally better. I became a much better programmer because now I knew two languages. So whenever I had a problem, I had 2 points of view of looking at that same problem and saying, oh, actually, this is pretty cool. In VB6, I could have done it this way. In here, I have this way, and I could see the difference. So I had multiple tools to solve the same problem. And as I learned Ruby a couple of years ago, I dropped everything, and I was a CTO of a company in .NET. And I dropped everything, and I wanted to start learning Ruby. So I started learning Ruby. And immediately I felt stupid because there was so much to learn there. Ruby seems like a very simple thing, but the ecosystem is so big that it's just like standing in front of a vast sea of gems and tools, and you have no idea where to start. But after a few months, it became better. And now I have 3 tools. I also learned C++, but as an example, I became a much better .NET programmer because I know Ruby. Because when I go to do things with ASP.NET MVC, for example, I have my experience from Ruby on Rails to see how things could have been done, maybe more clearly. And I have these multiple points of view of looking at the same problem. So I'm not just looking at something that's been handed to me by Uncle Microsoft and saying, yes, this is what I will use because it's in MSDN. But instead I look at it and I say, okay, this looks pretty good, I'm going to use this part, but I don't like this part, I'm going to try to solve it a bit differently because I know that solving it differently in Ruby works much better. All these techniques, all these templates, and JavaScript as well, Node.js, all these things, they teach new techniques and new skills about thinking about the problem differently. But at the beginning, when you learn all of these things, you feel really, really stupid and really, really annoyed. And that's part of the pattern. Now, it doesn't just apply to our professional lives, it applies to our real lives. This is me and my wife before we had kids. Now, at some point, we just had our 2 jobs, and then at some point, we had our first child born, and immediately we became really, really horrible as human beings because we couldn't even manage our sleep. People actually had to bring food to our house. We couldn't make our own food. We were so tired. We had no idea what we were doing. We were just stumped at this little thing that kept us up all night. It's just horrible. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time, but it's just horrible experience in terms of trying to manage your life and actually continuing to work at some point. Now, I wasn't working in Norway at that time. I was working in Israel. In Israel, the work laws are very different for the husband or for the wife. You don't have 6 months off. You have no idea how good you have it here. You have maybe a couple of months for the wife. The husband maybe takes a couple of weeks off work. Then it's right back to work. So, now you have to go to work without sleeping. So that was a nice learning experience. So after a few months, things became better. And as we looked back at the time we didn't have kids, we couldn't even believe we had ever complained about anything ever. If we had ever said we don't have time to do all the things we really want to do, now we're doing the same things only with a kid. So we realized how much free time we had before. But we would never have known that without having a child. So a year and a half goes by, and then we had our second child. And immediately, life had turned into something very unmanageable. Because, you know what, having one child is one thing. You can do shifts about sleeping. You take care, you 12 hours with you, 12 hours with me, and then we can do things. Now we have 2 kids. So it's like in basketball, where you have from 1 child per person, instead of 1 person over 1 child, 1 person alone. So it's like a different guarding technique, especially at night when they start waking each other. There's a chain of responsibility going on there. So life became very, very difficult for a few months. And then it became better, much better, because we looked at the time we only had 1 child. And we couldn't even believe that we had a problem with 1 child. 1 child is easy. 1 child is like having a vacation when you have 2 kids. With one child, I can go to work, I can play tennis, I can do whatever. It's like one of those tampon commercials. I can do whatever I want. And then a year and a half later, our third child was born. Now, a third child is very, very different from two children. You have to go into an area guard kind of technique. You cannot just guard one child. Now you have to guard at least two at each time. Sometimes you have to guard 3 children as someone stays alone at the house. And instantly, life is, I would say that we are just about in the incline from the third child, because he's a year and a half old now. But already, as I look back at the time we only had 2 kids, I can tell you this. 2 kids is easy. 2 kids is seriously, it's like a vacation. With 2 kids, I can do whatever I want. And if I look back at the time I only had 1 kid, seriously, 1 kid, it's like not having kids at all. With 1 kid, I can write 3 books at the same time if I had 1 kid. No kids, don't even talk to me. Just don't. If you don't have any kids, don't talk to me, don't complain to me about anything, ever. And this is the example, is that whenever you go through these things, you are actually a different person. You literally look back and say, I cannot believe I ever thought X. And if you've ever looked at your code this way and you thought, I cannot believe I ever wrote code this horrible, it means that you've grown, that you learn new skills, you're thinking about the game differently. If I look at code I wrote 3 years ago, or code I wrote just 1 year ago, there is a big difference. If I'm ashamed of it, it's a good thing. And that's part of the point, is that without these downturns, without these ravines where you jump into and you feel stupid, it's almost impossible to go up one level. It's almost impossible because you have to forget what you knew before to change the game, to look at the game differently. And that's part of the point, is that when you start looking at your life as a series of ravines, and you can start planning for it, you can realize that learning happens whenever you feel uncomfortable. And you can actually start enjoying it instead of having a miserable time. So for example, when I learned Ruby, it wasn't because someone forced me to do it. It was specifically because nobody forced me to do it. Specifically because I felt very, very comfortable in my role as a CTO of a .NET company. I could just sit there and just almost like go fishing every day, and life would be okay. But it was just, I would not be learning anything new. So I thought, what is the next ravine I'm going to throw myself into? And I looked at Ruby and I thought, well, a lot of people are talking about that, but I really want something that I will learn from. So I need a different culture. So I forced myself to leave work and become an apprentice at a Ruby shop. So I joined a Ruby shop with a bunch of Russian guys who kept swearing all the time. They were all using Vim. Has anyone ever used Vim? Okay, so let's talk about the learning curve of Vim, for example. Let's say that this is having a child. This is Vim, like this, okay? It's much, much lower. There is a joke that if you want to fool a student and give him 2 hours of something to do, just open Vim and ask them to close it. And it's true. But here I was, sitting with a bunch of Ruby developers. They were all using MacBook Airs, and they were all using Vim. They were cursing in Russian, and I felt completely out of my comfort zone. I felt stupid. But at the same time, where I felt stupid and said I have no idea what I'm doing here, there was this other part in my head that said, this is great. You're feeling stupid. You have no idea what you're doing here. You're going to learn so much from this. Like in a year, you're going to be a different person, because you're going to learn so much. And that's the difference. Because real learning happens when you feel uncomfortable. If you're just learning a new framework, you're not learning anything new. You're just becoming very, very slowly a bit better. If you want to learn something and you want to go up one level, you have to do something that you feel uncomfortable doing, something that you're maybe afraid of doing, something that you're going to feel stupid doing, that is kind of a risk. That's where real learning comes from. And the reason I'm saying this is because if I'm an architect and I want to grow the team around me, I have to realize that real learning comes from making people do things that they are uncomfortable doing. It's because real learning happens when people are out of their comfort zone. If you're in your comfort zone, you already know this stuff. There is nothing for you to learn. You have to get out of your comfort zone, so you have to feel uncomfortable. And this means that if I look at a person and I say, I want to coach you to become an architect, I can plan the next few months of this person as ravines of basically say, where am I going to throw this person into? What's the next pool I'm going to throw this person into? What am I going to force him to learn the hard way? And this is the point, is that you have to expect people to feel uncomfortable. Because if someone says, well, actually, I wouldn't be very comfortable doing that, and then you'd say, okay, then don't worry about it, don't do it, then you've already failed. Your job is to push people out of their comfort zone and to explain to them why it's important. And you would be amazed how much people are willing to do for the sake of learning a new skill. You just have to tell them that that's the point. You can't just say, nope, you have to do it because I said so and that's it. Because then people will just, they'll just not do it. You have to give people the idea that to become better, they have to do something that they might not like doing. And the reason they don't like doing it is because they don't know how to do it yet. Now, sometimes it looks like this. Real life looks like this, randomness, almost. There are ups and downs, but the real downs, the real ravines are much deeper, as you can see. So there is a ravine, and you learn something, but don't treat just having a bad day as saying, I think I'm learning something today. Okay, by having an accident, for example, or a flat tire. Like, I'm learning something today. But there are small learnings by saying, I'll try to do this one new thing every day that scares me. Like today I'm going to try a new type of food in Norway. There are maybe like 5 types of foods in Norway. That's what I've guessed so far, and I've tried 3 so far. So I still have I try one new food, one new Norwegian type of food every month. So I tried one of those fish that are hanging for like 10 months with all that salt. So, okay, I don't have a lot to say about that, except it wasn't very good.
How was it made?
How was it made? I want to know. So to grow the team, we must first realize that we can do it ourselves. Now, the true learning comes from a mentor. If you don't believe the things that you're saying to other people, they're not going to believe the things you're saying. So to do this, you must understand that you've gone through these things, and you must force yourself to do something as well for learning. And one of the ways to force yourself to grow as well is by starting to mentor other people. For a lot of architects, I feel that real growth is starting to coach other people. It's actually very uncomfortable for a lot of people to start coaching others. It's very uncomfortable because you have to talk one-on-one, you have to be proactive about something. You could be talking to your friend and still try to coach him about something new or about doing something that they might not feel comfortable doing. That's okay. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable because not only are they learning new things, you are learning new things. You are learning how to coach other people. So if there is only one thing that you can leave here today knowing is that you should try to learn how to coach other people because it will take you one level up from where you are as architects. Because you will gain a new skill and it will feel uncomfortable. And you have to learn how to feel uncomfortable in a planned way. So you can say, I'm going to try for the next 3 months to coach at least 3 people from 3 different teams or 3 different people from one team to learn a new skill about design, even if I feel uncomfortable or especially because I feel uncomfortable. And that's where your learning can come from as well. And when you succeed with the first person, what you're going to see is that you're going to tell that story as well, or in a different way. You're going to feel much more confident about what you're asking them to do because you'll know that there is a happy ending at the end, that you actually get better. So as an example, when I was a few years ago, I was a team leader, and one of the people in my team was a really unproductive person. They had a really bad knowledge of shortcuts. They were really a mouse person, and I'm a shortcut person. I really like the keyboard. Now, I thought I was a shortcut person before I learned Vim, right? Now I really knew that I wasn't a shortcut person. But I didn't even know that I didn't know that until I started doing Vim. So that was an example of a good reason to learn Vim. So, anyway, that was a story within the story, Inception, etc. So, I was this team leader, and I had this person in my team, and it was really hard to work with that person. But that person was also my friend, and I trusted him. And the last thing I wanted to do was to talk to that person about this problem. Because the first thing I thought would happen is that that person will leave the company or will stop being my friend or anything like that. But my mentor at the time said, okay, so you just told me something that really bothers you and you act as if everything is set in stone. Is that the team you have is what you're stuck with and that's life and that's it. But it's not true, because if you go to that person and you talk to them in a respectful way and you explain to them how this could benefit them, like learning touch typing or learning shortcuts, you might be surprised at what you find. But the most important thing that my mentor told me is that my learning is going to come from talking to that person. My learning as being a leader is going to come from doing this very uncomfortable talk with a person who is my friend. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And that person, basically, his office was basically where the end of this room is. And I remember when I was going over to call him for a few minutes of conversation, I literally remember my hand shaking of fear of what's going to happen in the next few minutes. Because I was going to do something that I would never dream of doing. That is talking to someone about something they could be better at as their leader. But I still did it, because the act of learning how to do it was what I wanted to do. And as I went and I said, you have 5 minutes, let's talk. And we sat together and I had this realization that I don't even know if there's something going through with that person. Is everything okay? So I asked, how are things at home? Everything good? And I wish that he would say, no, actually life sucks, I just got divorced or whatever, because then that would give me an excuse to say, well, he's not really unproductive, he's just having a bad time at home. So let's leave him alone, let's not do this talk. But unfortunately, he said that everything is great at home and that life is wonderful. And so I was cursing to myself silently and saying, okay, shit, I really have to do this, okay. And I wondered, how am I going to tell this person the things that I really feel without hurting him? And I started by saying, so what do you think about the way you work with the computer? If I told you that you could be 5 times faster a typist, is that something you'd be interested in doing? And he looked at me for a second. He said, well, that's awesome, sure, of course. It was like, he wasn't surprised. He wasn't like expecting anything. He was like, well, it's like I asked him, have you seen the latest basketball game, right? That, yeah, sure, that'd be awesome. Yeah, typing 5 times faster. What programmer wouldn't want that? And this huge rock just fell off my shoulders. I said, okay, that was not as bad as I thought it would go. I said, okay, so I really, because I think you could be much better, and I would love to teach you how to do that. Do you want to try and learn this together? And we set up a series of like homework where he would learn to touch type with a program that we bought. And every week he would sit with me on this article and he would show me how fast he was typing. So I was his coach. It wasn't like I was forcing him or saying you're going to get fired if you're not going to do it or anything like that. It was basically 2 people working together to learn a new skill, to teach a new skill. And that was my first experience, and I'll never forget it, of growing someone or challenging someone to learn a new thing. And the fact that it was so scary is what I will never forget. Because this is what tells me that it's okay to ask you to do these things that scare you. Because the end result could actually be much better than you anticipate. And that fear, a lot of times, is just a story we tell ourselves so that we feel like we don't have to do it. Okay, so I just gave you a bunch of inspirational stuff. But let's talk to reality. And reality just comes and slaps us in the face and says, okay, time. You do not have time, right? I'm going to ask someone to solve my architecture problems, but that's going to be much slower than I would have done it. And you know what? We're already 3 months late on this project anyway, so screw that. Nobody has time for that. And actually, that's right. If you don't have time, if you're already late on a project and you're already behind, you do not have time to start growing the people in your team. End of story, right? I mean, okay, so thanks for coming, basically. Didn't solve your problem at all. And in a way, that's true, because when there isn't time, then there isn't time. You should do things to make more time. You should now pull yourself together and make time so that you can start teaching people. And this is where the bigger picture starts falling into place. So what is your role as a leader? Your role is to grow people. But currently, you do not have time to grow people. Currently, you are what's called in survival mode. Survival mode up here is the mode that I think most teams are in today. Survival mode is what I call when you don't have time to learn new things, when you don't have time to practice new things. You want to learn TDD, but you know what? We don't have time for that stuff, so let's not do that. And survival mode is a perpetual mode. It actually perpetuates itself. Because you never have time to do unit testing, you never have time to write unit tests, and your code is always going to be slower and slower to debug. And every bug you fix can actually break other things, and so you'll have even less time to write unit tests the next time. So it's almost an addiction in a way. It's hard to beat this addiction. But you have to learn how to beat this addiction because you have to get out of survival mode so that you can get into learning mode. Learning mode, to me, is defined by having enough time to learn and practice things and actually using that time for learning and practice. This is the stage where you are a coach. But in survival mode, you cannot be a coach. In survival mode, a lot of times you have to be a more command and control leader. You have to tell people how to solve problems because you don't have time to teach them. You don't have time to get them to practice. So you have these two types of leaderships. In survival mode, you are a very command and control because you're trying to make time. So you're trying to get things done and maybe remove some commitments so that you can start making time, start making new estimates that give you more time. How much more time do you need in the learning mode to practice new things? Well, there's this book called Slack. This book deals with nothing but making time for learning. And this book talks about making 3 to 5 to even 10 times longer a task that you want to practice, that you've never done before. If you've never written unit tests, and you sent your developers to a 2-day unit testing course, and then you gave them 10% more time to write the tests, nothing is going to happen. Because to really practice how to write things in code that you've never done before, in a way that you've never done before, that takes much more than 10%. It takes probably double or triple or even more the amount of time it usually takes. If I teach my kid to tie their shoelaces, I send my kid to a 2-day shoelace master course, and then I expect him when he comes back to tie his shoelaces in the same speed that I do? Never. It will take a month for my child to practice, and slowly he will be able to do it, but it's going to be much slower, 3, 5, 10 times slower. Maybe at the beginning, very, very slow. And this is the same learning we need to apply in our organization. So that means that your estimation for learning mode is much higher because you need to give people time to practice, because you want them to solve their own problems, because you want them to learn how to do it. And at some point, after you you do learning enough, people will start solving their own problems. And then you slowly become a self-organizing team, because people no longer come to you to start solving their own problems. And that's the important thing. You want them to be self-organizing because the whole point of growing people is so that people gain new skills so that they don't need you. Not needing you is the definition of self-organization. You can lock them in a room for 2 weeks and they'll get things done. But most teams are in survival mode. They need you as a leader because they have no idea how to solve things without you. You lock them in a room for 2 weeks and you come back after 2 weeks. And they're just waiting there for 2 weeks, just waiting for you to come back because they had a question 5 minutes after you left and they were stuck, so nothing happened. And that's kind of the point. So your goal is to get a team to become self-organizing by growing the team so that you are actually doing your job of growing other people. And when we talk about time, you all know this, the triangle of requirements, time and quality, but you can always pick 2. And a lot of times what we pick is never quality. Because, well, that's just life. Quality is considered something that you can let go of. But obviously, this is not always true. We want to be able to have all 3. Now, I can tell you that it's possible to have all 3. So I'm going to give you an example of how, as an architect, you can create a team that creates quality code, ships on time, and also has the features. one of the teams that I was leading, they had really bad code quality. So one of the things that I decided to do was to instigate a policy where every code that gets checked in has to be reviewed, but reviewed by a pair. Not reviewed online via a tool, but reviewed by me. So I decided to become a bottleneck for a few weeks. And as I became a bottleneck, I sat down with the person who wrote the code. So there were two people sitting in front of the computer looking at the diffs of the code. But there was also a third person that joined us. That third person wrote notes and learned how to do code reviews. So after a week of me doing code reviews for everyone, we switched. And the person who sat behind me sat in front, and I sat behind that person. And now that person was doing code reviews. So after 2 weeks, I was no longer needed to do code reviews, but instead, the learning process continued. So there were always 3 people, one learning how to code review, one that just wanted to check in code, and a third one that was doing the review. But for a team of 5 people, after a month and a half, everyone knows how to do code reviews. Everyone can actually check in and review not their own code, but everyone else's code. A shared ownership, if you will. So there was a month and a half of learning that we had the time for because I estimated more time for each task. Yes, I created a buffer. I know that sounds horrible, but we all do it, so we might as well do it for the right reasons. So the buffer was for learning. So every task that I thought would take X, I buffered for double, which is what everyone does anyway. But I used that double time to actually get people to do the task on their own and to do the code reviews. So after a month and a half of doing this thing, the code quality went up amazingly. So we had a meeting, and even though I was the leader and I said this has to happen, now I said, okay, so we had an experiment. Do you like the experiment? Do you want to continue doing it? And everyone on the team, and most of the team at the beginning said, this is a horrible idea because now we all have to wait for you to review our code. So this sucks. And a month and a half later, all the people on the team said, this was a great idea. Let's continue to do it. Because our code quality is high, we are proud of our code. And we are actually shipping faster. So our estimates can actually now become lower again. So we went into learning mode, then back into self-organization. But the idea is that you challenge people to do things, and it was uncomfortable, but sometimes you have to use your authority to get new learning, to get new skills. Sometimes people do not know that they don't know it until you show it. That was not supposed to be a rhyme. Okay. So, what time is it? Do we want to do a small break? Who wants a small break? Never mind then. Okay. So let's talk about survival addiction. As I said, this is probably one of the things that most teams are experiencing. They are in survival mode, so they have no time to grow the people around them. So as an example, this is a definition of addiction, is that you think you want to do something because it's the only thing that seems to be working. So you feel horrible, alcohol makes you feel good, it's the only thing that seems to be working to make you feel good, that's what you're going to continue to do. Same thing here. Write test or get it done, you have a mission to do. Well, we don't have any time, so let's fix it with no tests, and we ship it, and the feeling is actually pretty good because you shipped something. And shipping is a great feeling, but something in the back of your mind knows what's going to happen. 1 week later, another task, should we write tests? Well, what did we do last time? Last time, we didn't write tests, and it felt great. So let's not do that again. And so life continues. This is a perpetual motion. And of course, a month later, everything's crap. Everyone goes to the team leader and says, well, not a month, but a year later, one says, our code base is horrible. Has anyone ever said, it would be better for us to do a rewrite than to fix this? Has anyone ever said something like that sentence to their manager? If we only did a rewrite, things would be so much better. Has anyone ever felt this in their bones? This is what happens. This is where it starts. These small decisions. So how do we prevent these small decisions from happening? We have to feel like we have time. So we need to get out of survival mode because we want to have time to learn, because we want to grow our team to solve their own problems. So now my job as a leader is very clear. I have an overall reaching goal, and that is to grow people. I see that I'm stuck in a situation of no time, so now I know what I have to do. Make time. How do you make time? Well, there are several ways, and they all require some risk. And remember, risk, fear, not a bad thing. It's part of your job to do the right thing. You start by removing some of your future commitments. You're already losing. So you might as well go to your boss and say, look, we are going to do a team reboot. We're going to start learning how to prevent the situation we're in right now. So we're going to have, for the next month, we're going to do whatever we can to finish all these tasks. But all these other tasks that we committed to, we're not going to do them. Because after this month, we're going to re-estimate them. We're going to give different estimates based on reality, and those estimates are going to be longer. Because this is what we have to do right now. There is no other way. Otherwise, we're just going to spiral into darkness and then just explode at some point. And this is something that you get paid to do, is to tell people what's really going on. That the architecture maybe is good, but it's not good enough. Or that the way people are using the architecture is really bad. Or that the architecture you inherited was created so horribly is that now you're paying a price that becomes bigger and bigger. And if you're just perpetuating the situation instead of doing something about it, you're just going to keep paying the price over and over. And you're never going to feel good about your job. I know that sounds horrible. But I've had some horrible jobs in my life. So to break survival addiction, you take risks. You take risks and you remove some commitments, future commitments. But you have a red line that starts next month, not this month. Because for the next 30 days, you put your head down and you become a command and control architect. And you become the person who solves everyone's problems but now it's a guided effort to go to a finish line where from this moment on, things become more, things are going to be with more time. Because we're going to do them in a learning fashion. We become a learning team instead of just a team that chases its own tail. And if someone ever asks you, why are you doing this? Well, you say, because this is how it's done. Because this is the way it's done. Because there is no other way. If someone asks me, but why are you writing unit tests for this? I don't say, well, I just say, what do you mean? This is how it's done. This is how I do it. If I go to my auto mechanic and I say, do you really need to do that? He's going to say, what are you talking about? This is how things are done. Yes, it's going to take 5 days to fix your engine because this is how it's done. Yes, it's going to take 1 million kroners because this is Norway. But this is how it's. I'm not going to argue with the person who's supposed to do the work. If someone tells me, look, this project is going to take three weeks without unit tests and 4 weeks with unit tests, of course what I'm going to do is going to say, look, I don't need unit tests. But the point is that there is no choice. Unit tests are part of the work. When I buy a car, the salesman doesn't say, well, it's 20,000 without the wheels, 30,000 with the wheels. There is no choice. It's part of the product. And this is actually what you get paid to do the things that you believe are the right things. Okay? Just like when you debug, someone asks, do you really have to debug right now? Yes, you really have to debug right now. This is my job. This is what I do. That's it. It's part of the work. And that's actually a very scary thing to do, is to say that things that didn't usually look like they were part of the work are now part of the work. But that's part of your learning process, is to learn to stand up for the values that you believe are right. Here's a technique that will help you to get out of survival mode, and also in all the other stages, is that you're going to have to convince people or try to understand why some behaviors don't work, or some behaviors that you wish would work don't actually work. For example, you wish your team would do test-driven development, but you know what? I have no idea why this one person doesn't do it. So this is based, a lot of this is based on a book I read a long time ago, and then a lot of other smaller books. But this is something I tried. So the book is called Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. And the best sentence in the book is that for each behavior, the world is perfectly designed for that behavior to happen. If that person isn't doing test-driven development, if that person is not sharing knowledge with everyone else in the team, the world is perfectly designed for that person to not to do that. And if you were that person, if you grew up with their parents, if you went to their military service, if you did whatever they did, and you had their exact clothes, and you went to their exact school, you would have done the exact same thing. Because this is where their life has brought them to a specific set of circumstances. So what's left is to figure out what around that person has created this behavior and try to change it. And this is where things really fell into place for me, is that a lot of times we tell ourselves, well, I explained to him how logical it is to write unit tests. So how come he's still not doing it? I already explained how logical it is. And we allow ourselves to think that just because something is logical, then obviously everyone will want to do it. And obviously this is wrong. So we always look just at the first two things that are written here. Personal motivation and personal ability. We tell ourselves, well, I sent that person to a unit testing course, so he has the personal ability to do it. And it looks like he has the motivation to do it. So what do I know? I have no idea why he's not doing it. I explained to him, so he should have the motivation to do it, and yet still it doesn't happen. And there are these four other things that no one ever pays attention to, at least I've never paid attention to. And these are the social and environmental aspects. There is a social motivation and social ability aspect. What's the difference? Social motivation are the people that draw you into doing a specific action. For example, you're the only person in a team that doesn't do TDD, but you're the only person who believes in TDD. What keeps you going? Because if you were the only person, no one else around you does TDD, there is very little reason to continue. But once a week or once a month, you go to this meetup group where you're no longer the only one. There are others like you doing test-driven development and talking about it and sharing experiences and saying, well, yeah, it sucks in my company as well. And suddenly you're not alone. Strength in numbers. This is why AA works as well. Is when people around you drive you to specific behaviors, people you respect, for example. The person you really respect believes in the same things you believe in. And so it doesn't really matter if the people around you are not doing it. The person you believe in already does it, so you believe you're doing the right thing. And that's a very important thing to do. So if you want the behavior to actually change, sometimes you need to create a support group for that behavior. Or you need to show someone that the person that they believe in actually does the same thing. Or maybe you'll find that the person doesn't do TDD because another architect that they really, really trust says that TDD sucks. So it doesn't really matter what everyone else around them does. They think that TDD sucks because a person they really respect hates TDD. So then your job is to find another person they really respect who says the opposite. That might help change. It's amazing how much things change when you respect a person that tells you that. But then there is also social ability. How do people around you react when you do something? If you are the only person in an elevator facing the other way and everyone else is facing the wrong way, studies have shown that people will just face the wrong way in an elevator just not to be the only person standing the opposite of everyone else. How people react around you is a huge, huge force. If everyone stays at work until 6:30 in the evening, you want to get up and go home, and you stand up and you see that everyone else is sitting at their desk and still coding, it's going to be very difficult for you to leave home early. That's an example of the environment around you. So motivation versus ability in social is like negative versus positive. Motivation is positive, ability is negative in socially. Environmental motivation and ability. So let's say the person has personal motivation to do TDD, they have personal ability to do it. Socially, everyone, the people they respect want to do it, and everyone else is trying to do it as well, and yet they're still not doing it. So what else could happen? Well, let's talk about environment. Environmental ability. That's the physical environment around you. Are you physically able to do the things you believe in? For TDD, that would require an automated build server. But maybe the company doesn't have a budget for an automated build server. So it doesn't really matter how many tests you write. They're never going to run. So the whole thing is pointless anyway. So all these other things can be true, but this can trigger a false alarm, an alarm that says not going to go. Maybe you do have the budget, but there is an environmental motivation to do the opposite. Environmental motivation is about rewards and punishments. For example, there is a reward for shipping early with low quality rather than having a reward for shipping a bit later with higher quality. And I think we've all felt that at some point, is that sometimes people who ship really crappy code that's very early get put on a pedestal, and that's a very big motivation for other people to say, okay, screw that. Why am I working so hard? I'm actually getting yelled on by my manager because I wrote unit tests, so screw this. And this is an example. Mike Cohen has in his book, Succeeding with Agile, he has an interesting bit where he was explaining about pair programming with people. And one person got up and left the room. Said, I'm not doing this, left the room. And he found out that in that company, they have an annual review, and each person gets a bonus based on the quality of their code. That sounds like a pretty good idea. But then you think about pair programming, and you realize that in a pair, you don't know who wrote which code. So you can't actually give the person a bonus based on their code. So that person would get less money at the end of the year if he did pair programming. And there you go. Everything else can be true, and only this one little thing, that's actually pretty big, can change their mind about doing something. So this is an example of a map or a checklist that you can look at and say, well, why does this happen? It's like almost like a more scientific way to think about things and say, well, is it this thing? What about this thing? What could have changed their mind about this? And you know the people around you much more than I do. So you will be able to fill this list usually about specific person you're working with. So think about it like a checklist. And most importantly, sometimes you're going to face 3 or more than a single thing to fix in this list. So sometimes you're going to say, well, there is a lack of ability. There is also social motivation problem. There is no one, or that person is alone in trying to do this. And environmentally, we want to do pair programming, but all the tables are rounded. So there's only room for one person to sit. So we cannot do pair programming because one person is always going to sit behind the other person. So that's not going to happen. And then to change the behavior, you're going to realize that you have to fix all these 3 before the behavior changes. If you fix just 1 or 2 of these factors, the behavior will not change. That's a very, very strong lesson for anyone who wants to make a difference in the company, who wants to really drive real change, is to start looking at things with a framework, with a checklist, and trying to understand what would make a difference, what would change that behavior. You see a manager that doesn't want to give a budget for something that's really important, you try to go on this checklist and try to understand what makes that manager behave this way. And sometimes you realize that if you only send that person a link by email to like a manager that he really respects or like a CEO he really respects that talks about the practices that you believe in, a day later, that person can change their mind. Sometimes it's that easy. But you have to think about these things. You have to approach it in a more structured way. So that's getting out of survival mode is going to be much easier this way. I'm not going to go through all the modes. I'm just going to say that in learning mode, the best way to get people to learn new things is to challenge them. If someone comes to you and says, solve my problem for me, you can actually ask them in a way, what are you going to do about it? Or I want you to solve it. And as I said before, this is a big thing to start doing. It's very difficult. If everyone expects you to solve it, you're going to be the one person who makes things, who works a bit differently with everyone. And that's going to be very difficult. Another thing that can help you is commitment language. This is helpful if your team are already people who listen to you and you want to hear what you have to say. If people don't yet respect you or don't know you yet, this is going to be very hard to implement in the beginning. But if you're a leader of a team already, commitment language can change a lot about the way people make things happen. Commitment language is the actual words we use when we promise something. A lot of times people say, yes, we're going to do it, but they don't really mean what they say. So commitment is about saying what you want to do, meaning it, and actually following through. And changing the language is the first step to start making things change. As an example, a lot of times, especially in Europe, I've noticed, is that people say a lot, we need to, it would be nice, or if you ask someone to do something, he says, okay, I'll try to get that done by somewhere, or let me think about that, or anything. And I've noticed, by the way, in Norway, when people really want to tell you no, they say, let me think about that and get back to you. And that's something that, for me, it was really hard to face because I'm used to a different culture. But it's different to say, let me think about it, than saying, I'll try to get it done. Because one of them is a sort of a promise, the other is just an example of delay. But what's common with all these sentences is they all give you a way out. They all give you the permission to not follow through. We need, or I could, or why doesn't someone, takes the blame and puts it on someone else, never on the person who said it. If someone promises something and says, yeah, I think I can do it, there is a way out. If someone promises something and they say, I'll try to get it done by tomorrow, there is a big chance it's not going to get done by tomorrow. If I tell you, yeah, I really need to lose some weight, does that mean I'm intending to actually lose some weight? No. Okay, and that's an example of the language we use. And in our language, we use a lot of words that give us an escape hatch. And what I want you to do is to try and change the language and actually ask people to use these specific words. I will buy. Not I might, or I could, or I think I will, but I will. As a fact. That's a very hard thing to do. It's very hard to change, but you can look for these things. And as an example, it takes a long time. In my workshop of the Elastic Leadership, the thing that Mark talked about, I spent half a day of getting people to try and coach others to change the language and to figure out that the language could change. But if you get this, I will, by, you get a commitment that does not sound like it could happen or it might not. You get a commitment of something real. But even better, if people are afraid to say these words, then you know that there are some hidden obstacles that you need to overcome. And that's a very important thing. One of the best ways to make sure that there are no hidden obstacles in your team, or something that you will have to take care of that you don't know of, is to see if people are actually willing to commit to something 100%. And if they say, well, I could, and you say, can you say I will? And they might say, I will. No, actually, I can't say that because, and then they'll give you something, a good reason why they can't. Like they physically cannot commit to that. And then you'll find something that maybe you didn't know before. And now you've learned something about something you might need to help fix. So it's a good way to raise problems that might be hidden inside the team. So looking for these specific words, you get a commitment and an end date or time. And the end time is important because it's about follow-up. But here's another catch. You do not ask people to commit to things that they cannot control. You can only ask people to commit things that are fully under their control. So if you have a bug or 6 bugs that you have to fix by the release, which is in the end of the week, you cannot ask a person to commit to fixing those 6 bugs by the end of the week, because actually fixing them is not under their control. I mean, how long it would take. It is under their control to work on fixing them, but they cannot control how long it will take. So you cannot ask people to commit to things that they cannot control. So what would I ask someone? Instead of saying, can you work on that? Can you commit to fixing this by the end of the week? Because if I do this mistake and I ask someone to commit to something by the end of the week that they cannot really commit to, they're just going to make me happy and say what I want to hear, instead of really meaning what they're trying to say. So to avoid this, I might say, can you commit to working on these bugs at least 6 hours every day for the next 5 days? This is something that is fully under their control. It is a part of activity. It's an activity that leads to the solution, but it does not control the solution. If I want a salesperson to meet with 50 different customers, that is not fully under their control because the other person is not under their control. So they can only commit to sending 50 emails. They can commit to making 50 phone calls. They cannot commit that the other person on the other side will actually pick up. So I will not ask them to. And that's a very important distinction. You can ask people to commit to something, but only if it's fully under their control. So if they're not managers of anything, they can only commit to their own actions and not to anyone else. Someone comes to you and says, you know, you're the architect. I really want everyone to start using this new framework because everyone is doing things like cowboy. Now, this is an example of using challenge. You can say, okay, what are you going to do about it? Because I want you to learn how to solve your own problems. Now, this person just came to you and said, we need to do things better. They care about it. Now you want to teach them that if they care about something, they can do something about it. So you say, what are you going to do about it? And that person might say, well, let me think. I don't know, I came to you, so why don't you solve my problem? You say, no, I will not solve your problem. I want you to learn how to solve it. I can give you ideas, but I want you to come up with ideas. That person might say, well, if we meet and I can teach everyone, then maybe it will make a difference. You say, okay, so can you commit to arranging the meeting? Now, arranging the meeting is under their control. Making sure everyone shows up to the meeting is not, because they're not everyone's manager. Okay? So that person can now say, I will commit to sending out a meeting invitation to everyone by the end of this day. And that is fully under their control. So now they came to you with a problem. They are living with an action that they will actually start doing something about. So they are starting to solve their own problems because when they came to you, you gave them the ball back to them and said, what are you going to do about it? And it always surprises people, even though they know you're going to say it. A lot of times, especially at the beginning, people will come to you, they will know you're going to say that, and they will still say, I didn't think about that. Because sometimes people really need to hear it from the other side, that it's expected from them to solve it. Another question that comes up is, do I say that all the time? Do I not solve anything anymore? Because now, every time someone comes to me and says, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And that's kind of stupid. Because that's not going to be helpful. The idea is that you plan for each person, with them, a set of ravines that they will go down through. And only on those things, you challenge them. And then on the other things, you can still solve their problems because they're already learning something else. So you cannot flood everyone by saying you have to do everything alone. It is an incremental process. So you slowly but surely teach people different skills, and you challenge them about different things, and you do not challenge them about other things. Because otherwise it will be very unproductive. It is a very slow process of learning new skills. It might take 6 months or a year or 2 years before people realize their full potential. It took me 6 months to really realize when my team leader said, why are you writing these comments? I challenge you not to write any comment and only make the method names better. Good enough. And it was really difficult. I hated code reviews for a couple of months. I really hated it. It took me 6 months to realize that I learned how to write much better code this way. Because sometimes you don't know these things. So, as an end result, what I want you to do is that to realize that you are all leaders, because you are all bottlenecks in your own special way. Bottleneck is not a bad thing if you're doing something about it. What you can do about it is to grow the people around you to solve their own problems. This will give you a lot of time for yourself to do things that you love to do, to learn the things that you always wanted to learn but you never had enough time, and to use this time to coach other people. And that is, I think, your true role as an architect, is to teach everyone else how to think like an architect, instead of telling everyone else how to do things. Is to teach them how to think like you. So if you're interested in the course, you can just send me an email. If you're interested, I'd be happy to. A lot of the stuff that I said is at 5wise.com. That's my blog. So I'd be happy if you came over, read, put a couple of comments in. And I wanted to give you a short treat, if you'd be interested, of course, is that I have this guitar here, and I would love to do a short song for you that I wrote. But I need a volunteer. Now, don't worry. The volunteer will not be singing or dancing whatsoever, but I do need someone to press space so that everyone can see the words of the song. Now, the person who helps me is going to get my book about elastic leadership for free. Oh, that was easy, you see. That's called environmental motivation. What's your name, sir?
Robert.
Robert, can you give a warm welcome to Robert for being so brave and wanting to be bribed into doing something? Okay, Robert, why don't you sit over here? I'm going to get another chair. Okay. Now, let's do a little test to make sure that your skills are up to par, okay?
Mm-hmm.
When I finish the words on the page, you press space, but
Okay.
not before that,
Okay.
okay? A short song. This is a test line. It looks like you're doing just fine. It's time for a song of mine. Okay, he passed the test. Okay, good. Okay. So this is a song I wrote. I also wrote the music. But then Eric Clapton stole it. It's about one of the teams that I was part of. And I remember having a really bad time. It was a long time ago. I was a really, really bad programmer. And nothing would work in that team. Just nothing. And this is a song dedicated to my team back then. It's late in the evening. I'm wondering what words to say. It's so hard to breathe here. The customer's face is gray. And then he asks me, is the product alright? And I say yes, we deploy it all tonight. Checking the changes, the code doesn't even compile. I wish I was home now. Instead I just fake a big smile. And when they ask me, is the code alright? I say yes, it seems to compile tonight. I feel horrible because I see the sadness in their eyes when they find out that the product doesn't even have logged files. This thing is doomed. It's time to go home now, and I've got an aching head. So I lock my computer and pray that tomorrow I'm dead. When my wife asks me, do you feel alright? I say yes, let's watch Game of Thrones tonight. But I feel miserable because I'll guess the sadness in their tone when they find out that tomorrow I don't plan to come to work and write my CV. Thank you very much.